Hey, what's up, everybody? It is Soda Tsudo, the new Differ, or Stardust, whichever one you want to call me. And this is part two of What If Deku was Gambit. Um, I really appreciate the support I got for the last video and everything like that. You guys really seem to enjoy that one. Um, and yeah, that's really for real, all I had to say. Um, Make sure you check the YouTube description and everything like that to see the Discord, TFP's Discord, and everything like that. Without a further ado, let's get into this. The factory is old, hollowed out by time. Rusted beams, cracked windows, faded warning signs. Light pours in through broken skylines and uneven strips. Izuku Midoriya sits on a crate, elbows on his knees. His knuckles are bruised. His eyes are tired. Around him, Circle stands with three others. The mood is wrong. Not casual, not friendly. This isn't a hangout. This is a talk. Circle looks at Izuku, low and serious. Izuku, you scared the hell out of all of us. Izuku looks up at him as kind of in a nervous but also defensive way. He says, I handled it. A voice from the side says, no, you didn't. A girl leans against a pillar, arms crossed. This is Vixen. Sharp eyes, short hair, quick movements. A parkour runner, scout, always alert. Vixen looks at Izuku. You panicked, overcharged, and the blast went wide. Izuku looks at her. But they they were about to. Circle interrupts him as he says, it doesn't matter. Circle steps a little closer to Izuku, almost disappointed, as he looks at him and says, you don't get to decide who lives and dies out there. That's not any of our decisions. Another man steps up and speaks, a little older than the rest, but he's big and, you know, he's a lot more built than everybody else. He's obviously the muscle. This is Brick, tall, bouldered shoulders, scars across his hands. Calm, measured, but you can tell that he's been through some stuff. Brick looks at him as he says, you tag a cop like that, you don't just end a life, you end all of ours. Whenever it comes to killing cops or anybody, it brings a lot more heat than what we do. You might think that this is the biggest of the big, but taking from people is one of the pettiest and lowest crimes on the board. That's why we do it. If we wanted to go around killing people, at that point we would have joined a gang or did something that involved hurting others to the extent that you tried to. And yet we didn't. As he finishes his sentence, there's a silence inside the room. Izuku clenches his fists as Izuku says, I wasn't trying to kill anybody. As Brick just steps in as he says, it doesn't matter what you meant to do. One more voice joins in, casual, almost bored. This is Silt. Messy hair, crooked grin, hands rested on the ground. Silt looks at him as he says, rules are rules, kid. He taps the concrete and the floor subtly ripples. Silt looks at him as he says, my bad. He looks at him as he says, break him and the game's over. Izuku looks around as he realizes something important. They're not asking him. They're telling him what the rules are, and they're telling him that he needs to obey them. Circle steps close as he says, from now on, no lethal force, ever. As He's almost a uncomfortable distance away from Izuku. It's obvious he's not trying to intimidate him, but at the same time, if he was being intimidated, he wouldn't care. You can see it inside of his eyes, his expressions, everything. Vixen looks at him as she says, "If things go bad, we run." Brick goes ahead and steps in as he says, "If we get caught, we get caught." Circle looks at all of them as he says, "You don't like it?" As he shrugs, as he says, "You're free to walk away. Get a job, mow lawns, do deliveries, whatever you need to say or do to get around the streets. But if you stay here and you want to roll with us and do everything that we do and learn from us," she kind of locks eyes with Izuku as he says, "You play by our rules. This isn't a game." They all stand there in a long silence. Izuku swallows. His mom's face flashes before his mind. Hospital lights, empty vases, what it's like to struggle and not have anybody by his side. For once, this is the only group of people that Izuku can both depend on and maybe even one day call friends. Izuku looks down at the ground in a defeated way as he says, "Okay." The tension inside the room eases as Circle laughs as he says, "Okay, good. Then let's stop pretending." He goes ahead and gestures over. "You already met me, and this is Vixen." As he kind of looks over at the girl of the group as she grins slightly as she says, "I keep lookout, roofs, alleys, anything that moves. I see first." She hops onto a beam effortlessly as she points over to Brick as he says, "I plan exits. If anything goes sideways, I make sure there's still a way out." And next is Silt as he says, "And I make the playground." He presses his palm against the ground and concrete rises and bends, reshapes into a ramp, barriers, narrow pathways. Silt simply says, "Anything I touch, I can mold. Stone, dirt, metal dust." He looks at Izuku as he says, "So you're going to learn the hard way." As Izuku stands at the start of the makeshift obstacle course inside the factory, as Silt simply says, "Get to the other side." Izuku runs and immediately trips and slams into a wall as Vixen looks over at Circle as she says, "Okay, so he's already too stiff at all of this." As he kind of laughs as he says, "Go ahead and give the kid some room to improve. He's new at all of this. I think he barely knows how to control his quirk. It doesn't look like he's used his quirk very much. It seems more like he was focused on everything else rather than being a kid and learning what he can do." Izuku gets up as he tries again. A ramp shifts under his feet as he tumbles. As Brick looks at him as he says, "You think too much." Again, he misjudges a jump as he gets tagged by Vixen's foot tapping his shoulder. As Vixen looks down at him, Izuku looks up at her in absolute confusion on how she's standing on his shoulders, completely weightless. As Vixen says, "Dead." Izuku's panting, sweat dripping down his body and clothes, as he says, "What do you mean, dead?" As Vixen says, "Well, here's the thing that a lot of people need to learn. In what we do, we don't just run into cops, which they are a pretty big problem. We run into heroes too. Sometimes villains that want territory and want us to stay off of their territory. But for the most part, under most circumstances, we don't care about rules, lines, or anything like that. Heroes, if things get bad enough, are definitely willing to kill you depending on who they are. Cops, well, they're issued guns. And as for villains, they usually don't have any morals. As Izuku kind of looks at her, as he says, I could just, as his hand slowly glows, as Circle says, don't. You rely on your quirk like a crutch. And that's the problem. As Izuku exhales, as he goes ahead and, looks at her as he says, can you get off of my shoulders? As she simply jumps up onto a steel beam into the factory. She says, go ahead and try again. She says, well, how am I supposed to try again if I can't use my quirk? As Silt says, here's the thing about free running, like we do, usually whenever we're running away from cops. We use the rooftops, alleyways, anything that we can. We don't use our quirks most of the time unless we absolutely need to. The reason why is because your quirk is literally listed inside of a database. The more someone knows about your quirk, the more they can narrow it down to you. And the worst it is for you. As Zuko looks at him as he says, then do you guys ever use your quirks? As Brick says, yes, but in very subtle ways. As Izuku kind of nods, Circle looks at him as he says, go ahead and try again. Izuku goes ahead and tries again, jumping through the obstacle course, slowly jumping across walls, but he trips and falls again and again and again and again. Over time, he slowly begins to adapt over the next couple of hours, learning spacing, momentum, how to move without charging everything he touches. He still fails a lot, but he gets better. After a couple of hours, Silt looks down at Izuku, drenched in sweat, as he says, okay, so you're terrible. As Izuku groans and, his head hits against the ground, as Silt looks at him as he says, but you've got potential. As he gives him a small smirk. As Izuku says, but I thought you just said I was horrible. As Silt says, for someone inexperienced and unathletic like you, you do very well on running on walls, jumping across rope. Well, better than the average person would do if they were unathletic like you. But even when all of that happens, you keep trying and trying. Even if you need a little bit of a push, that's a good trait to have. Some people, even when they're being pushed, can't continue to go on and try and work to get better. As Izuku says, so does this mean I'm on the team? As Circle laughs as he says, okay, look, kid, you're on the team, but don't think we've forgiven what you did with the entire cop situation. If you ever do anything like that again, we're kicking you off the team. As Izuku nods. After a while, Izuku runs jobs with them, pickpocketing, small warehouse hits, quick smash and grabs, nothing flashy, but something that allows him to learn restraint. He uses his quirk sparingly, charging coins, cards, pebbles, precision over power most of the time. Circle gives him pointers, Vixen, Brick, Silt. Everybody teaches him ways to slowly but surely improve his quirk. Not to make him a prodigy at using his quirk, but just enough so that he can get better. And, of course, the money starts coming in. Not a lot at the very beginning, but enough. Hospital bills get paid. Flowers keep appearing beside Inko's bed. things stay good for the most part. But over time, Circle suggests a slightly larger target, a private storage facility. Small, not very well noticed, but something that can make them enough money for them all to be good for a couple of weeks, if not maybe even a couple of months. But it is riskier. They they pull it off barely this time, and someone notices. But they are able to get out of the facility without any injuries or anything like that. As they're jumping across buildings, Circle looks at everybody as he says, "Did y'all notice that?" As they nod, as, they're casually jumping across buildings, using each other as leverage and everything that they need to do. Izuku is barely following behind. He's built enough stamina to be able to run with them, at least inside of the sense of keeping up with them a couple of feet away, but he isn't as fast as everybody else. Even Brick is faster than him, and he's a lot more bulky, bigger. It's definitely not hard to notice him. As Izuku kind of, stops as he says, "Okay, okay, let's take a break." As Vixen looks at him and she says, "What do you mean a break? You can't just stop running because you get tired." As Izuku's on the ground gasping, laying on his stomach, as he says, on the concrete of the roof, "Then what am I supposed to do?" As she says, "Well, you slow down and you slowly recover your stamina. But you don't go all in because we are going as fast as we are. Believe it or not, we're not going full speed. This is our regular running speed. We're just used to each other since we've been around each other for a lot longer. You're new around here, so you're not used to things like that. And that's fine. That's how things should be." As she looks at him and she says, "What we were talking about was, back there, somebody noticed us." As Izuku kind of, looks at her as he says, "No, I was on lookout. I didn't see anybody." As she kind of looks at him as she says, "Whenever you commit your crimes, almost all the time, someone sees something. You might not know it, you might not guess it at first, but somebody saw us. Luckily, we have on masks and everything like that so that we don't have to, worry about our identities being exposed or anything like that. But someone definitely saw us." As Brick kind of simply says, "So what are we going to do?" As Circle, looks at everybody as he says, "We're going to slow down on crimes, not do too much. Until everything calms down and the investigation goes cold, we're not going to do much of anything." As Silt kind of says, "If you ask me personally, I feel as though we should give it a little bit of time, but not too much. We all still have to make money, and we all know we have to split it between all of us. The little bit of money that we're making now can't provide for all of us, nor can we stay away from work too long." As, everybody just looks at each other. As Circle, grabs the back of his neck, sighs, as he kind of walks away. As Vixen looks at him, as she says, "Here he goes doing this again." As Circle jumps on top of, a roof door, as he screams up to the sky, "Fuck you." As Izuku is looking at him in complete confusion on why he's screaming. As Izuku's kind of, scurrying, as he's like, "Shouldn't we be quiet since we just robbed a factory?" As Vixen looks at him and she says, "No, we'll be good. As Izuku looks at her in confusion, almost, completely brain farting, as she says, or he says, what do you mean will be good? I thought you just said I couldn't stop just because I was tired. Oh, yeah, I meant in any other situation, not specifically this one. As Izuku looks at her and she says, you're joking, right? As she shakes her head and she just kind of, makes cat eyes and says, not really. As Izuku kind of looks at her and sighs as he says, anyway, I gotta head back home, so I guess I'll see you guys when I see you guys. Circle looks at him as he says, okay, no, catch this. As he throws something over to him, as Izuku catches it, as he looks at it confused on what it is, as he says, what's this? Is it some type of device? As Circle looks at him as he says, it's an ancient device. It's called a pager. As Izuku kind of, looks at him as he says, what is a pager? As Circle laughs as he says, something that I got from my great grandfather. Apparently these were pretty famous a couple years ago, or a couple 100 years ago. As he says, really that far? As he laughs, as he says, not literally like 200, 300 years ago, but it was a while ago. There's basically none of these left nowadays. He told me how it worked and everything like that, and he gave me one of them. I worked on it for a while and was able to get it working. All I had to do from that point was go to Silt and ask him to try and recreate it. As Izuku looks at Silt as he says, wait, you're able to create stuff like that too? So he nods as he says, I did tell you I'm able to change or manipulate any material I touch. Dust should have let you know that I can do basically anything with anything. As Izuku looks at him as he says, with all of the quirks that you guys had, why did you guys never become heroes? As when he says that, everybody just starts cracking up. As, he's just kind of looking at them in confusion. As Circle kind of, pats his back. As he says, don't worry about it. How about you go ahead and head home? Izuku nods as he says, well, I guess I'll see you guys later. And Circle, turns around walking away. So he gives, a small little wave, not looking at him. As time skipped to the day, Izuku walks with a bag of groceries. People are gathered ahead inside of a small little circle. He hears whispers, phones out, camera flashes. Izuku's completely confused as he hears somebody say, that's him. No way that's him. He wouldn't be here. As everybody's, gathered up as Izuku walks up behind them and shyly asks, what's going on? As another person turns around as he says, an investigation hero. Izuku looks at him in confusion as he says, what is there an investigation hero here for? So he says an incident down at this privately owned factory. As he kind of looks past the dude as he sees a man standing there calmly talking to the store manager. This hero is Trace Point. His quirk is forensic insight. He can reconstruct events from residual evidence. Trace Point turns as he looks directly at Izuku. Izuku freezes as the hero walks over to him. As he kind of, is sweating. Thoughts running through his head as Trace Point looks at him as he says, hey. Izuku almost nearly drops his bags. Trace Point gently straightens Izuku's crooked collar as he looks at him and gives him a smile as he says, careful, you'll wrinkle it. as he walks away. As Zuko's looking at this, holding his breath, completely confused and slightly terrified. Everybody inside the circle is now, talking about Izuku and the fact that they can't believe a pro hero actually touched him, especially inside of a non-emergency. Izuku goes back to the factory, panicked, as when he walks in, he sees everybody in a circle. As Vixen looks over at him as she says, "We're burned." Brick looks at him too as he says, "We slow down." As Circle simply says, "Everyone does less." As Izuku looks at them as he says, we can't just do less. If we do less, we're gonna go broke." As Circle simply looks at him as he says, "And if we don't do less, we go to prison. So what would you rather do? Be broke for a couple of weeks, or be completely out of your job and in a prison?" As Izuku kind of looks at him as he says, "I saw him." As everybody turns to him, Circle looks at him as he says, "Where did you see him at? Did he talk to you? Did he suspect anything of you?" As Izuku says, "No, I don't think so. He came up to me and straightened my collar. As far as I know, that's all that happened. I don't think he suspected me. He said I'd ruin my shirt if I kept it crooked like that." As Circle nods as he says, "Okay, so this job's become a lot more serious. Everybody, pack everything up. We're leaving." As they all go ahead and pack their stuff up, Silt touches the ground as he completely deconstructs the obstacle course and every other thing that they've made inside of the facility. As he looks at all of them, as he says, "Okay, we're going to factory number 2. Izuku, I will text you whenever I need you next. We'll let you know, and we'll be gone for a little while, but we're not abandoning you. We're not throwing you under the bus. We just need to take a little bit of time off." As he pats him on the shoulder and simply walks past, Izuku looks back as he gets a bad feeling inside of his gut. As he thinks Circle and everybody else is gonna throw him under the bus. He's the most sloppy one between anybody else. And if they do that, then the heroes will be off of their ass. He tries to trust that they won't betray him, but inside of the back of his mind, he can't fully commit to that thought. For the next couple of weeks, Izuku is completely on guard. As even when he's going to go and visit his mom, he's on guard, looking through the windows, checking down the hallway and everything. As Inko kind of looks at him and she says, "Is something wrong?" As he looks back at her, as he says, "No, nothing's wrong. I'm just, checking out some stuff." As Inko looks at Izuku as she says, "What's going on? You look like you're about to have a heart attack." As Izuku laughs as he says, "Nothing's going on, Mom." As he kind of walks over to her and gives her a kiss on the forehead. As she looks at him and says, "You promise?" She nods as he kind of says, "I promise." As he holds her hand, she says, "You better not be getting inside of any type of trouble with bad people. You better not be doing any trouble yourself." So he kind of nods as he says, "I promise." As when he says that, he kind of feels his pocket vibrate as he checks his pocket and looks at his pager as it simply says "meet up." Izuku nods as he says, "I gotta go." As Inko kind of, looks at him as she says, "What was that? I've never seen anything like that before." As he kind of says, "Oh, it's something that my friend made for me. It's a school thing." As she kind of says, "Okay then, well, I'll see you next time you visit me." As he kind of nods and goes ahead and heads out. As soon as he heads out of the hospital, he sees Vixen waiting on a door. As she looks at him as she says, "Finally, you took forever." As Izuku jumps as he looks at her and says, "Why are you here? You're not supposed to be here. How do you even know where I was?" As she looks at him as she says, "After the night of you doing that stupid stuff to the cop, we had to make sure he wasn't going to snitch or anything like that. So they told me to keep tabs on you. And ever since I have." As Izuku looks at her as he says, "And?" As she looks at him as she says, "And it doesn't look like you're going to snitch. Anyway, we got to meet up. Come on." As Izuku looks at her as she says, "What are you doing?" Izuku kind of, trips up a little bit as he says, "Okay, I'm coming." As he follows behind them. A little bit later, it's nighttime. Izuku and everybody else is now inside of their outfits and everything like that, ready to rob. As Circle kind of says, "Okay, look, we'll go in through the bottom. Silt will break us in through a side. Vixen, you jump through and get everything that you need to get at the front. Everything at the front is on an alarm, so we'll need to get it fast. You only get it whenever we're done with our job. You get out as fast as possible, either from the front, back, or even the vents, and then you get out. Everybody else will get all of the main stuff. Izuku, you stand on the roof and you open up a passageway to the vents. We'll be going through the vents to be able to get up. Vixen will too, so make sure you wait a little bit longer if you don't see her pass out through the front. Okay?" As he kind of nods and he kind of says, "Okay, I got it." As they all go ahead and head out, as Izuku makes his way on top of the building, he kind of uses the air to spring himself up, using the kinetic energy inside of the environment to land on top of a roof. As he creates another small kinetic energy blast before he lands so that he doesn't break his leg. As Izuku looks around, kind of, a little bit worrisome as he's checking his surroundings and everything like that. Every so often, he's seeing people occasionally walk past the building and everything like that. And he's kind of fidgety. So he's looking left and right, up, down, anywhere. As he starts to get more and more paranoid. As he starts to look around faster and faster and faster. As his heart begins to beat harder and harder and harder and harder. And eventually he hears a knock as he jumps away. As he looks at Circle slightly through the vent as he says, "What the hell are you doing?" As Izuku kind of says, "Oh, sorry about that." As he goes ahead and touches the vent and he disintegrates it. As Circle and everybody else walks through. As they say, "Okay, now it's time to go. Izuku, remember what we said." As he kind of nods. As they begin to free run, rooftop to rooftop. Mid-escape, they turn a corner and stop. As they stop, they see 5 figures block the path. Calm, confident, almost cold. Not cops or heroes, just people. From in front of them, one of the voices says, "Relax." The tension is suffocating. The unknown voice says, "If we wanted, you'd be caught. They step aside slightly, the unknown voice saying, "Now, what are you doing in our territory?" As Circle looks up at them as he says, "I also have a question for you. Who are you?" As the voice simply says, "That's not important. My name, who I am, everything like that is kept confidential. We asked you the question first." As Circle kind of looks back at everybody else, Sprick says, "I'm willing to do anything that you're willing to do." Izuku also nods his head, as he kind of does it unconfidently, but he does. Vixen looks at him, sharp-eyed, ready as ever. Silt is already touching the ground since he's seen everybody. As Izuku says, "Am I good to do what I need to do?" The Circle says, "Yeah." As when he kind of looks back at them, he kind of squares up as Izuku grabs a trash can lid, as it glows a pink color, as he looks at everybody, ready to fight. As right before they pounce, a woman pushes past everybody else, kind of knocking them out of the way. And she says, "Everybody calm down. There's no need to fight." As Circle looks back at everybody, and he slightly nods as everybody calms down. As Vixen looks at Izuku, as she says, that means don't attack." As Izuku says, "Oh." As he places the trash can down. As Circle simply looks at them as he says, "Who are you?" The woman steps up inside the middle between the two groups, but looking at Circle and his group. As the woman simply says, "We're the Thieves Guild. And you have been very loud." As she smiles, not unkind, but you can also tell that it's not a kindness. As she steps forward a little bit more, she says, "Be smarter, be quieter, or you won't last." As she says that, everybody then vanishes, and she smirks inside of the silence, as the shadows then proceed to engulf her, and she disappears also. Izuku blinks, completely confused, and so is everybody else. They look around, and they notice nobody else is there. They lower their guard a little bit. As Izuku looks at this, he's completely and utterly in shock, as he says, "Huh?" And that's where I'm going to end it, you guys. If you guys enjoyed part 2 of What If Deku was Gambit, go ahead, like, subscribe, tell me what I need to improve on in the comments and everything like that. And yeah, also, TFP has dropped a new video today, so go ahead and check that out. It is on the channel The Future Prospects. It is a channel with all of us. It's a Death Note video. I did kind of fuck up and forgot to not even forgot, my mic fucked up. It wasn't even on me. My audio went out basically. But on there, we're playing Death Note Killer Within Us, or yeah, Killer Within Us. So if you'd like to see something a little bit different from me, or you'd like to see how I act on that game, which is like a dumbass, go ahead and check that out. Join the Discord if you like to talk to me or you want to discuss anything. And with all of that said, I love you all. Have a good day.